Perfect. All right, we're going to jump right in. We're going to call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock. I'm here. Thomas is here. See him. Meg, Barb, Chuck, Ricky, and Jim is absent this evening. Is there anything for public comment this evening? I want to do something a little bit differently, and then we're going to jump into some a presentation this evening. I wanted to start off with sharing with folks assembled here and also the board. One of our former employees and was a longtime fire chief of Cumberland Head Fire Department. And most people don't realize this, but in 2016, his death was identified as an in the line of duty death. And what occurred on Tuesday is his name was added to the New York State Fallen Firefighters Memorial. This is only the third time that this has ever occurred for an individual in the county. I was privileged to go down with a delegation of individuals, his friends, his family, but they had a moment of silence for the 23 individuals that were presented on that wall in the, I believe it's 2,575, I believe, other names. What I'd like to do tonight is, just in recognition of him and his tribute to our community, to have a brief moment of silence before we begin. Okay? Thank you. I got another program that we will leave in the record of our archives too. But if anybody is ever down in Albany, it's at the Empire Plaza. It's a beautiful memorial. So, without further ado, we're gonna pitch this over to Trevor Cole, our senior planner department head, to introduce the work that's been going on with the Smart Growth Plan. So, if you guys want to grab some seats or turn your chairs around, whatever is best for you folks.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Honorable members of the town board, thank you. First, I want to say thank you to you all for having the initiative and forethought and willingness to pursue long-range planning. That really is the, I think, core and backbone of most of the initiatives of the town, and has resulted in actual measurable outcomes of progress in the town. I would also like to thank our Public Advisory Committee. We don't have a whole lot of them here. That means we got so much use out of them. We extracted everything out, and now they're so weak they can't show up. But in all honesty, they've been a really great Public Advisory Committee. Sometimes you have engaged committees, sometimes you don't. I think our Public Advisory Committee has been fully engaged and provided their best insights to move this planning process forward. And finally, I will introduce our good friends now and really smart planners at Chase & Companies, Paul Cummings and Chris Round, who are always great to work with. And I think we have their A team at Chase, and I do think that they've given us their best insights. And without further ado, I'd like them to introduce what we've been up to for the last year or so.
Well, great. Thanks, Trevor. And I just want to thank you all for having us here tonight. Just as a little bit of an ad lib, it's funny, we do these things a lot, and it always, at town board meetings, a lot of stuff, and I'm always moved when you have moments like a moment of silence for that, because it kind of puts it all in perspective what we're doing here, and just appreciative myself. So, with that, I just want to thank you for having us here. The idea is that we want to introduce, for those of you who have not been involved in the process, some background here tonight. Some of you, I'm looking at some familiar faces. We've been at this for a while here. I've been around since when we worked on the comprehensive plan in 2009, and we recommended some additional planning for the Route 3 corridor. So, and I know some of you all have been around as well. And so with that, and then on a history, I do want, for those of you who haven't been as involved, to give you a little bit of an overview. But I do say, for those PAC members that are here tonight and others, I do apologize, because some of the stuff that you will see here tonight is a little bit of a repeat. But I promise you there is some substantive takeaways and next steps, so that hopefully will excite you. So without further ado, what we want to do is go over again, a brief overview, and that includes looking at, again, just briefly the planning process and sort of the underlying principles of why we're doing this project. But I do want to jump into the recommendations themselves. Now, in the interest of time, I obviously can't speak chapter and verse each item, although some PAC members probably say that I probably could. But there are copies up here, black and white copies. We will be posting copies on the website, and hopefully, I think several of you got an email today as well, so you have an electronic copy. I do encourage you to dive in it and look at it. PAC members, it is the same recommendations we went over the last time. They just have some narrative to those things. From there, we want to talk about next steps and then allow for all you to have any questions that you may have, and I hope you do. We really do encourage that. Project overview. You all know this better than I do. The growth that you're all experiencing in the town of Plattsburgh is real. You are defying the balance of the North Country. I heard just today from the supervisor, some thousands of square feet that you've all reviewed within the last couple of months alone. We keep hearing this. We're from up this way. I listen to NCPR and I hear about all the new projects and I think we all recognize the growth that's occurring in this area. And wisely, you've all decided that you want to manage that growth so you don't look back a generation from now and said, only if we had just done this, which is very smart. Again, I mentioned 2009, that plan did say and recommend that a specific plan for the Route 3 corridor should be explored for a number of reasons. At that time, it was about design and character and the roadway itself. I think we all recognize Route 3, it's a very important transportation corridor, the commerce, etc. But I think we all recognize that it could be improved aesthetically, functional, both for traffic and for pedestrians as well. And so it recommended that. In light of that, in 2017, the town applied for a grant through the CFA process, the Consolidated Funding Application, and was awarded a grant from the Department of State to do a smart growth plan for that Route 3 corridor. Piggybacking off that, NYSERDA awarded the town a grant to help support that planning effort because NYSERDA recognizes that smart growth is a sustainable way for growth, preservation of environmental resources, and enhanced quality of life. So they already immediately were on board to supplement this grant effort. So the good news is most of what you're hearing and seeing here today has been paid for by grants and by the volunteer work of your committees and then also certainly your staff. So kudos to all of you for participating. But ultimately, the goal of that smart growth plan was to inform future zoning and land use decisions. And so I'd argue that's center of the point where we're at right now. I keep mentioning this term smart growth for those of you who are not familiar with it, and I won't read all these and bore you. Simply put, smart growth is about investing in and focusing development efforts where there's existing infrastructure. It's about wise and efficient use of resources. In a world of limited resources, let's maximize the investments that we've already made, principally. To achieve that end, it is about higher density, mixed-use development that is walkable. It's the principles and plans that help arrive at those land use decisions should incorporate a wide array of stakeholders and people and involvement and collaboration, and I'd argue that you've done certainly that, and you'll see in a minute all the public input that we had. So again, this is very much a smart growth plan, and these are the guiding principles that we all worked with. And so with respect to the planning process, it's funny, we've had this slide up a couple of times, but we've been able to add a check each time. And so we had, various meetings. We have a project website for those of you who aren't familiar. You can always go back and look at the summary of those meetings. We developed a vision statement. That was a group exercise with the PAC. We did a lot of analysis. We looked at past plans, studies, looked at market conditions, looked at sewer, water, road infrastructure, you name it. We developed a draft master plan. We're presenting to you what we think is our recommended master plan, along with including in the plan draft design guidelines to support any subsequent zoning revisions. And the plan itself really is an implementation strategy. We don't like to write plans that are sort of your policy goal planning piece. We really like to write them in narrative form, and they talk about how to actually implement those recommendations. So the plan itself is very much that. With respect to public input, we had a number of PAC meetings. Those PAC meetings were almost quasi-workshops in and of themselves. Trevor and the planning staff did a great job at letting people know about them. We had a lot of turnout at those meetings. It was always great. Some of the meetings, we'd have the PAC members and another 10 people on top, 15 people, which was excellent, because it just added that much more value to the exercise.
There was always food there, I think.
And there was always food,
There's always
which was
food.
amazing. That's also rare.
I'm enjoying it all.
Yeah, I think I ate it all, if you can't tell. The website, we did get feedback from the website, or we heard that people were using it, looking at it, along with social media postings, press releases, sort of the traditional flyers, all those things. The stakeholder meetings were really valuable. We had a number of different phone calls with those additional people attending the PAC meetings. But for those of you who didn't know about this process, we also did, in this space, a day of speed dating. We met with a number of property owners and key stakeholders that are involved with the study area. We're not in the business of top-down writing land use for people's property. We want them to be at the table and speak with us, quite literally. And so the PAC helped us create a list of individuals that we could speak to directly. Given those individuals, often it was a large land or a large land use, and if they weren't on board or ready to fight City Hall, the project just wouldn't have been viable. And the great news is often we heard them before we got to a chance to really explain what it was that we want to do. They were already talking about, oh, we'd love to be doing this. I wish we had more flexibility with the zoning for this, etc. And so the short message is that, you know, we really had a lot of positive feedback from them and on board for the vision. We had a great workshop. Many of you may have attended that. Great turnout. Since then, we've been meeting with the PAC, and then obviously a meeting like tonight is certainly included in this process. So we began with the community, with a visioning exercise and developed a visioning statement. And I don't want to read to all these slides, but I think it's important. This exercise, we all asked PAC members, based on our input that we had heard early on in the process, to write what they think is important about the area and what they think is important about the process. And we were able to merge those ideas and create a draft vision, and then we all got to vet it and add to it and edit it. And this is what we came up with. And I just want to point out that the idea is to create the study or create a unique, high-quality built environment that serves as a destination for visitors and a wonderful place to live, work, and play. Housing, employers, shopping, and public spaces are located close to one another, allowing a sense of place, that's an important idea, and community to thrive. Quality housing options accommodate residents of various age, lifestyles, and incomes, filling the, quote, missing middle in the local housing supply. And we'll talk a little bit about that missing middle. That's a really important summary. I think that captures the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And that's going to impact things like transportation. It continues on. Building design, balancing growth. And then certainly with the idea of this, if it's a smart growth, truly a smart growth policy, is about that sustainable return on investment. That has environmental return on investment and financial return on investment. And so why are we doing this? We got to think back to where we are at today. And here's your current zoning map. And if you look at the study area, which is, you know, we've sort of narrowed it down to some roadway corridors, but more or less summarized in this image here, a predominant part of that, predominant zoning in this area is shopping center commercial district. Then we have a mix of your various types of industrial zoning, and then the service center district, which is probably the greatest zoning districts by land use. And you know, when we write zoning, and I understand it, we help administer it. When you create zoning like this, and it's in a location like this off the highway, you're gonna get what you ask for, right? And so when we look at your existing land uses, it is just that. I mean, obviously you wrote zoning to reflect some of the things that are already happening, but certainly a lot of the things that are happening are a function of your zoning. And so you have along your Route 3 corridor and the environs, you have industrial land uses, you have highway commercial corridors, you have big shopping centers. These are great uses. They employ many people. They're obviously an important part of the local economy from sales tax revenue, so we don't want to dismiss this. But we just need to think, hey, if we're thinking 25, 30, 50, heck, 100 years from now, where do we need to be? What's the market demanding? What are new residents? These people who are moving in for new jobs, what are their expectations? We need to be thinking at that level and how sustainable this effort is. And can we get a better return on investment? That's probably a better way to put it. And so we worked long and hard on some of these images that we're about to show you. They're not just pretty pictures that were created out of thin air. This involved a lot of public input, poring over maps, visual preference surveys, you name it. And so how do we get to something different that reflects true smart growth? My apologies, I jumped ahead. When you have zoning like this is not Plattsburgh, but these are just sort of your token suburban sprawl. This is the sort of development that you can expect, the sort of land use patterns and transportation model to expect when you have zoning like that. And so we're proposing something different that goes from this to something like this. Now, this is a little hard to read. If you don't usually look at maps, it can be hard to read two-dimensionally, but I just want to walk you through this. That's the same area we just showed here, right? And this is a multi-generation idea at full build-out, hypothetical full build-out. If we were to zone this area, what it could look like if it were to infill. And we have different colors represent different districts that are being proposed. This red area, anything in red in this area, is the highest density area. In planning words, because we haven't given a fancy name to this area, we call it T5. That's been the term we've been using. T5, and it'll make sense here in a minute, would be your highest zoning area. Then you might, as you radiate out, and that's an important idea, radiate out and extend from T5, you might have a slightly lower density. It might be apartment complexes with some commercial, or they could be standalone apartment. Whereas this T5 is mixed use, higher density. As you further radiate from there, you would have, where in yellow, you would have slightly lower density. The residential housing could be single family, could be duplexes, etc. But the idea is that it's a mix of uses horizontally and in some places vertically. Note, we don't think much should change here because this is really doing well for you. Maybe you can improve streetscape, infrastructure. Some of the current developments in there are really attractive. We think you want to keep asking those industrial uses to keep that design level high, but we call that a special district, if you will. But it's really important to point out, various proposed roadways and linkages and moving towards a grid pattern that's more conducive to multimodal. Yeah, Charlie.
Paul, you're doing a great job. I just wanted to emphasize one thing for the town board. Could you go back one slide? So in that study area, just drilling down on the importance of what you said about this change, we've noted in this plan that this area here represents approximately 5,000 jobs, but only 300 residents.
Yeah.
So jumping ahead to your next slide, think of what that change could mean.
Exponentially job growth and that doubling of residential. We know from site selectors and working for the private development, the services that you all and that your community is asking for, different restaurants, places to gather, that sense of place that I referred to. A lot of that development, commercial development, doesn't come unless you have the sort of the heads and beds. If you go to other areas that are doing things like this, the residential is coming in first, and then they're building the commercial afterwards. So I can't tell you how many communities we go into and they want a grocery store. Well, often you don't get the grocery store unless you have the housing. So that's on a small scale and one singular use, but that's just a slightly good example. For those of you who are used to looking at zoning maps a little bit more, if you were to break this down into your conventional districts, it might look something like this. Again, we thought long and hard about this because we took into things like where your existing infrastructure is located. What are the property boundaries? Where are their natural resources? There's a massive wetland complex that we think is an asset. One of the property owners there said, hey, they're already exploring opportunities to do outdoor recreation that's tied to that being a water resource, boardwalks, zip lines, whatever. And so that could be a public-private partnership, some collaboration, but this is sort of the lungs, your central part of the town center as we're proposing it. It's important to note that we would think that you're going to have lots of little parks and recreational facilities, whether they're at the subdivision level or other spaces that you plan as a community to provide for potentially new residents. So what does it look like? We can talk about this in this academic sense. Based on visual preference surveys, we put a number of pictures before the committee, we looked at these at the public workshop, and people picked images that they liked, these visual preference surveys. I'm looking at some of the PAC members nodding their head. That T5, people really like the 2 to 3 story building, but the peak roof. The idea is to not repeat or compete against the city, but something a little bit more subtle and complement the city. Again, with that transect approach, the city being the highest density rating out. Areas like T4, this could be a commercial use on the ground floor and above is an apartment, so duplexes, apartments. Your newer highway commercial and this might be a residential area, this T3 residential area could have commercial uses along the roadway. So again, it's allowing for a range of uses. We're more worried about form. So your conventional zoning approach is always about what's the use, what's the setback. We're really just worried about form, allow for a wide range of uses. And then this higher density, high quality housing. you already have an existing housing development that really is something we use as a template. And then there's opportunities for all sorts of special types of housing, you know, whether it's tiny houses, co-housing, senior housing, et cetera. You might have opportunities for that. So what are the results of this plan? This is where we're going to diverge from some of the things that you all have heard from the public workshops in the PAC. And now that you have the plan itself, a specific result of this plan are draft design guidelines. And these are pretty darn good draft design guidelines. They're not too far off that if you want to pursue this product or this project, you have standing in the ready design guidelines. The design guidelines are very visual. We were just talking about visual-based zoning. You can describe in 6 different sections and flip through your zoning now to figure out what the heck a rear lot is we were talking about earlier. Or you can just draw the darn rear lot and say this is what it is. And so this design guideline shows the T5 should look like this in spirit, streets should more or less look like this, parking lots should look like this. Oh, and by the way, there's a ton of uses that we allow in this area. Again, it's more about form. So it's very illustrative for each district. And the idea is, again, is this transect approach, this radiating. So downtown Plattsburgh might be this urban T6. Forget the numbers. It just simply, this is how we used to build. The idea is to go back to how we used to build, high density to lower density. And so that's why we pick these numbers. This is sort of a universal language in the planning and architectural community. You may decide to rename these things, but for now, this is based on that universal language. You know, we're really looking at development patterns that are here, whereas downtown Plattsburgh's here. So it's not about building a whole new city center. It's about a complementary town center. And what is the result of that? Well, it gets you those places that people want to live, the places you travel on vacation to. Walkable, high-density downtowns. It also happens to be the thing the development community wants to be building right now. We heard people wanting this, asking for this sense of place when we did that visioning exercise at the start. PAC members kept saying, you know, place to eat, place to gather. You know, it'd be great if we can walk and we can get out and we can meet all year round. You know, so we have all these warm weather images. But it's important to note, I was just at a conference in Chattanooga. What I'm telling you is not revolutionary. This isn't groundbreaking. The rest of the country is doing this. It was an international forum, heavy representative from across the US of urban designers, planners, developers, artists, etc. This is what we're competing against. If you're trying to attract high quality labor force for these jobs that you're generating day in, day out, this is what they're expecting. This is the type of community they'd like to be living in. And it's not groundbreaking. We know how to build this stuff. We're at our office, our engineers, we design and build this all day. It's what you decide to do from a land use perspective. And what we're really trying to do is, one of the results that we're trying to do is fill this missing middle. This is a term you may have heard before. So the result of this plan, for the last 70 years, we've been building single-family detached homes and maybe some downtown stuff, but we're missing this missing middle. And why is that important? We talk about a housing crisis. Pick seniors. We need senior housing. Pick those with special needs. We need special need housing. Group housing. Affordable housing. You name it. So what we do, our response is, oh, let's put a senior housing developer over here. Oh, let's put a group housing over here. Let's do an affordable housing project over here. I'd argue a significant amount of our housing crisis in our country would be solved if we just went back to a more conventional way of developing. And this is what we know because we're doing it elsewhere in the country. And this provides a greater opportunity of duplexes, in-law apartment spaces, affordable apartment units that are at market rate, etc. Now, I don't want to paint rose-colored or look at rose-colored glasses or paint an overly pretty picture. You could run the risk of gentrifying this whole area and making really high, expensive housing here. So there are other efforts that you're going to need to do to ensure that you have housing opportunities for all individuals in your community. And I'm talking about young professionals that we pay well, that still, the apartments can be really expensive. We're talking $1,000, $1,500 a month mortgages. You know, that can be unattainable for many people. And we talk to many people with various income levels. So there isn't, the form is important, but you still need those policy programs and private partners and public partners. This sociability in public spaces. We call out in the plan a number of specific sites where you could develop public spaces with public partners, or in individual subdivisions, for example. You might have that, hey, you're putting a couple hundred unit apartment, housing complex, you need X amount of recreational facility in that space, so it can be site specific. But the important thing, or it could be part of a private development project. You've probably been to shopping centers that are developed, they look like little village areas, and they have facilities like this. We want these incidental public spaces that promote sociability, because that's what life's worth living about, right? And another result we gave you, another result of the plan, and that we have in there, this is just one sample figure we have for the entire Route 3 corridor within the study area. We provided a conceptual rendering that's based on property lines, the right-of-way. It's obviously not survey level, but it passes the smell test, the feasibility test. You have a significant amount of right-of-way in this area, and with that right-of-way, you can maintain the number of road lanes. We think you can narrow some of those road lanes, calm the traffic down a little bit, fix some intersections that we know are problematic, so focusing on cars. But at the same time, you can provide a lot of opportunity for people to walk, people with different means of transportation, whether those are with needs, or people on bike. And obviously with housing in and around here, people could get around that much easier. Now we're not proposing, and here's a little cross section here you can see, the same road lanes, and you really have enough right away that you might be able to get away with like a 12-foot wide shared use path on one side where people can walk and ride, and then a conventional sidewalk and bike lane on the other side of the road. I'm not proposing, and we're not proposing, that any one of these businesses here is now on the hook to build their respective section. That's not how this works. This is a piece of DOT infrastructure, and there are ways through grant funding, working with the DOT, and public-private partners to achieve projects like these. We've had experience in retrofitting these corridors in the past. It's something that DOT's interested in helping to support. They want multimodal transportation. And so we think that this is a feasible effort with the right grant writing, collaborating with the right partners. And so this is an important point. I'm nearing the end there for those of you who are saying, when the heck is he going to shut up? This is an important point. So we start this conversation about smart growth and sustainability. And to ensure that this is not just lip service, I want you to think for a minute that the growth potential that we just saw in that image, the study area, if you were to not have it here, but it were to spread outward based on your current zoning, imagine that. So it's either can happen in this town center area, or it can spread outwardly. The market demand, people need the housing, we keep building it. Picture those two different scenarios. What we're saying is our scenario has a greater return on investment in a number of different ways. It has, and we have some of the numbers and calculations we've done, and I'll talk to those in a minute. Reduced vehicle miles traveled. That's reduced CO2 emissions then as a result, per unit. Reduced building energy use per unit. Greenhouse gases, land consumption, stormwater runoff. Higher jobs to housing ratio, to your point that you just said a moment ago, Trevor. And just to give you some real numbers, and I try not to read from the slides all that much, but I do want to read this section that's from part of our NYSERDA analysis. This is a very abridged version of it. We took an example of the Champlain Center and said, if that site stayed as it was, or if it was a blank site, we rebuilt the Champlain Center, and we looked at it from its analysis based on these categories, or if it were to be developed using this form-based code T5 approach, because that's where that area would be, here's some results. Using the redevelopment of the Champlain Center as an example, there would be a reduction of 169, 6,896, and 260 daily weekday, Saturday, and Sunday trips respectively, compared to the existing condition. Now, I want to add there's a caveat to that. It assumes that it's in an already urban environment, so some of those pass-through trips, people that would otherwise get in the car can actually walk. Assuming the national average vehicle trip length is 9.72 miles, this translates to over 4 million vehicle mile trip reduction per year, compared to the existing condition, which results in which is an approximate 403,750 kilogram reduction in annual CO2 emissions. The estimate average energy consumption per square foot would decrease approximately 36% from 0.22 MBTUs per square foot to 0.14. With respect to land conservation, the redevelopment of the Champlain Center would accommodate 1,818 apartments and 454,560 non-residential development. However, to accommodate this same number of housing units within the town's, for example, existing residential district, R2, would require 230 acres. So I think that conceptually really illustrates how higher density, and you can imagine the stormwater benefits. So if you're developing just a smaller site versus 260 acres, you obviously have those stormwater benefits as well.
For scale, if I could just emphasize that for the board too, if we think of the former Clinton County Airport, about 500 acres from now to God. So that would, what he just said, for taking areas we know, the Champlain Center could either, with our potential new zoning, accommodate 1,818 units at that density, or half of the former county airport would have to be used for the same amount of housing.
And you wouldn't get all the other ancillary benefits that are tied to this different form of development, which is 2.7 times more land consumption than under the recommended approach. So those are, I apologize, as I pointed out, there's a lot of information in here, and I'm hovering at some of these big takeaways and recommendations at 10,000 feet. The plan specifically talks about how to get to do these things. These are achievable. They're not overly complicated, believe it or not. They sound a little complicated at this point, but if you're committed to it, and we heard from your community that this is what they'd like to see, we don't think it's impossible. And it is certainly a generational or two-generational plan, mind you. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of this, but moving forward, we do recommend that this plan be considered for an adoption as a comprehensive plan amendment. You have an existing comp plan, you can adopt the plan as a comprehensive plan amendment. And that allows you and sets you up for the subsequent zoning revisions. State law, your zoning needs to be in accordance with your comprehensive plan. As part of that, you would need to go through the proper seeker action, public hearing process, so the conversation with the public is not over, mind you, and that's a good thing. And then you need to conduct that seeker review, make a determination accordingly, and then you could go about adopting that plan. That's something that can be done over a couple of meetings with the resolution, proper notification. So you're at striking distance of having this plan adopted as a comprehensive plan. It's important to note, adopting as a comprehensive plan doesn't commit you still to this point, so you still have time to review and make various decisions. When it comes to implementation, it's important to know how much more public input and engagement is involved. For example, when we say implementation, some of the things we recommend in the plan is we think you should adopt an official map. You may say, Paul, you're nuts. How do you get all these roadways? How do you get people to agree to these roadways? The state of New York, the enabling statutes, you are allowed to adopt an official map. Not every community adopts it. You may even have one. You may have an official map from 1952, for all you know. You can adopt an official map that spells out, that shows all where your official roadways are, your official drainage districts are, the stormwater, those sorts of things. And you can put proposed roadways on that and say, we'd like a linkage here, and it puts everyone on notice or on the same page about where they'd like a future roadway. The official map's flexible enough that allows you to move that roadway if a particular development were to come in and say, yeah, we'll do the roadway, or we'll leave an easement for that roadway, but we'd rather it over here because we'd like to do this. So you start piecing those things together. Town of Malta, their form-based code area, they've been doing that. They have a linkage study over time. Eventually, now they have a series of roadways that splinter off their Route 9 corridor and 67 that are connecting all those roadways.
You said earlier that the plan would double the number of residents and job growth would be exponential. Did you mean it the other way around? Because it's going to way more than double the number of...
Well, those weren't quite literal. My point is that you would certainly increase the capacity for residential housing in the area. And with that, by virtue of just a simple number, let's say the commercial market likes to build, let's say 20% of that space is for retail, business, restaurant, that employment opportunity that would come there.
You're basically saying they would both grow.
They would both grow, yeah. We don't have and that's actually a great segue into, save that thought for a minute. We think then you would subsequently update your zoning to reflect that map that was there, the design guidelines, and revise those figures accordingly. We think you might want to consider adopting what's called a generic environmental impact statement for the area. I don't want to overly complicate that, but there's a way to look at seeker on a more global scale than site-specific and mitigate potential impacts of growth, let's say related to traffic, whatever it may be. And you could even evaluate, and to your point, you could even evaluate and look at what potential job growth and residential housing growth could be, what the impacts to school are, and be able to find ways to mitigate that through whether it's mitigation fee or identifying some other strategy to address any potential impact. And then there's related standards that obviously need to be addressed. Highway standards, parking, stormwater. And then you could advance these related projects. I mean, you could start tomorrow, we could pick up the phone tomorrow and start harassing the DOT, for example. Pursuing grants, and I don't quite literally mean that, but I do. And, you know, so that's a site-specific project that could be undertaken. These housing opportunities, for example, finding those partners that can help put in, help advance any of those housing, whether it be affordable, special needs, et cetera. And then the siting of public facilities. So if you have areas of parkland that you'd like to develop now or secure, you could start advancing some of those select projects. And that might help investors. So, you know, if the parkland is really created, you know, investors are building housing around these types of amenities. And I don't want to sugarcoat this. This requires more investment over time. You might need more planning staff, for example. Maintenance needs, whether it be more roadways, for example. In Malta, one of the things they realized, heck, they need a different plow truck and a different plowing approach to plowing because their giant plow trucks don't fit on their roadways. So those are investments they made. I would argue that the return on investment from this land use approach offsets those costs. We know from cost of community surveys, whether you're looking at from ag or from this perspective, urban development, the return on investment exceeds conventional subdivision housing. By the time we send that cul-de-sac out and plow it and all the kids that come into school from there, the return on investment often it's a net loss. There are plenty of studies there. This is certainly farmland, and the two uses we're trying to get you to promote more of, or open space and this urban design, can have a greater return on investment to offset those costs. So with that, questions, yeah.
Okay, yeah, good time. How, the town is growing really very rapidly. I mean, there's a lot of development here. Is that good in relation to the plan? I mean, is there a danger of the build out happening more quickly than we can get it organized? Is it, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. My understanding, not being in charge, anyone, supervisor, jump in anytime. The growth has two components to it. What I've seen in our experience, you're seeing this industrial, I'll just blankly call it industrial. You might call it light industrial or manufacturing, whatever you call it. Call it light industrial or heavy industrial. There's that, right? So you have this district that's growing, and that's commanding jobs, right? The other end of it is you are seeing the site-specific conversion of either vacant sites on the Route 3 corridor, or an existing use that is going to go under or has gone away for whatever reason, and someone wants to convert that. I think they're both good in that when you have these new employers, you have employees that need housing. Right. And we're going to be better off having those people have less commute times, walkability, live where they live, work, and play in one area. So I don't think you're behind the 8 ball there. When you're having some of these site-specific redevelopment projects that on the commercial end, that is also a good sign for me, and I'm an optimist at the end of the day, because I know in other areas that have done this form-based code approach that these are willing players. Take any commercial developer that's out there right now. You have the local fast food restaurant that just went up that's very, very popular, right? I'll give you an example. Again, I use Malta because it's one of the closer examples of community we work with. Go down, get off exit 12, look at the Dunkin' Donuts there. It's the nicest Dunkin' Donuts you've ever seen in your entire life. It's 3 stories, awnings, it's attractive. I mean, it's absolutely, if they scuttled it, I'd go move there. It's a beautiful piece of architecture. So the point is, these entities, if there's demand and people want to spend dollars, they can change their design. They'll always tell you, first go around, no, we can't change it, this is our corporate. Go to Woodstock, Vermont, look at the McDonald's there, if the demand's there. So you can leverage that. You can leverage those developers that usually don't like to play like that in the highway commercial to build what you want. The nice thing is, for those developers, and over time, what we find in these areas is that you have some developers that are pretty savvy, that start to learn how to play the game. In our area, we're fortunate to have a gentleman by the name of Pete Hoffman, I'll just pick on one, or Bonaccio in Saratoga, that say, oh geez, I can make a killing on this. maximize the footprint of my development, I can put 80% housing on this thing, my return on investment's crazy, and I just gotta make the facade really nice and put the parking in the back, and that's what everyone wants to buy. So it's really, it's what they want, and it's easy, the review process, it's predictable, so this is not something that's like, you know, scares everyone away. The people that scares away are people who are not thinking about 50 years in the future often.
And I would add that I think that in many ways, having the plan in place and the subsequent zoning will mitigate the potential negative impacts
I agree.
of that by pushing the density towards where utilities already exist, putting multifamily units in the core where now there's only 300,
Yeah.
residences where there's 5,000 jobs. So I'm hoping that our timing is exactly right
Yes.
and that we're not.
Yeah.
One of the single biggest issues that our region is facing, not the, but one of them, is transportation. This takes a huge stab at it, in so many ways.
Yep.
I would invite you to Google ALICE, or the ALICE project, for the asset limited income individuals. Transportation is very high on that list. When people have competing factors for apartments and various other things, in this region, the Four Seasons, my question to you is, certainly there is a significant melt in New York State, residential, okay? We are about to go through a census. Do you have any recommendations on how we can harness the census numbers when they come in to drive our smart growth in a way that is truly, measurable in a way? I mean,
Yeah.
this is,
No,
this,
I get you. Yeah.
this is all very good
Yep.
information in many respects,
Yep.
because it's the plan moving forward.
Mhm,
But I think you always have to back that up with the
data. Yep.
the data
Yep.
of what is occurring in your region, your community.
Sure.
Have you done any of that? Have you
Well,
seen that?
we were behind on the, we are waiting with bated breath on the census. I'm always a little, the ACS, since I've been around long enough to remember when it was just the census, the long form, short form, and you had to wait every 10 years. And the ACS is a bit of a reprieve, because you get to look at at least some wag at the numbers over that 10-year period. The problem is the margin of error is so high. You look at some of those margin errors, it's 20-30%. So on a regional scale, that doesn't.
ACS, Paul?
What's that? I'm sorry, the American Community Survey. So the Census Bureau, constitutionally, we do a census every 10 years. The census stopped doing a long form and a short form during your survey. That's why you typically just get a very basic census every 10 years. They're constantly doing surveys depending on the population of your area. They might be doing them every 2 to 5 years. And then what they do is they're able to extrapolate the data from those 2 years and the sampling that they're doing to help create more updated numbers throughout time. The problem is in more rural areas, maybe not the block groups and tracts that were associated with the city and the town, but certainly portions of the town and beyond, could have a large margin error. But regardless, the census, what I'm excited about to see is I would look for when I'm thinking about a project like this is what's going on when I look at age cohorts. So where are the baby boomer millennial populations moving around? So are there certain areas where you're seeing? Well, there's still a big block coming up.
I know.
No, I know there's still if you look at the cohorts, there's still a big block. And then so we may not be gaining an overall net increase of population, but where are the populations going, and could you have captured those populations? And if you look at your labor shed and your commute times from the census, so if you're seeing, I'm seeing pockets of baby boomers and spread out all these areas, people are commuting 20, 30 minutes, but then we also know there's a great little tool called On the Map. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, US Census. You can draw a little block. We did it for this area. It's in the, and you can see where people are commuting to. It creates your labor shed. People are coming from all over the place. How many people are you missing? It's what they call leakage in retail, but how many people are you not capturing because of this?
I'm imagining that our tri-county area, for instance, those are the same things that we're gonna wanna look at too.
Yeah.
So.
And then back to your point about transit, the magic number you often look at is it's 10 to 15 units per acre is what transportation specialists look like. So if you want to talk about a viable transit option that's doing a shuttle, and just like when you think of with bus stops, all those things, you need that density, you know, it's not, oh, well, you build a bus stop, because you're ultimately gonna be subsidizing that service quite a bit until you have those residential densities. And so that's another thing to think about to get to that, so.
I'd just like the board to know, kind of, the way I've been thinking about this town center plan approach is, it's almost, looking at the right ingredients, it by no means guarantees everything, but if we were looking at proper, the economic and cultural growth that many of us might wanna see, we haven't had the ingredients through with Euclidean zoning that shows a big red dot in the middle of our zoning map and says, these are the only uses you can have there, that with a 2,000 acre area have only yielded 300 residences. And if you look at the ingredients of economic and cultural expansion, it's, well, one, people living there. So even if people are commuting from Malone to work here, they can't, they're not able to find that job, that home near their job. So I often think about all the really nice pictures that we saw of these community spaces, right? That's the really stuff that feels good after you've developed it. And then there's I think another hardcore truth that, think of we have about 12 hours or more a day of almost zero economic activity in our commercial core because no one's there. No one will leave their apartment and stop at the Stewart's to get a soda.
Until 10 in the morning when stuff opens up, most everything, right?
So there's a 12 to 16 hour window of no economic activity in our commercial center of town.
Yeah.
Where, you know, you can pick any town you like, whether it's Saratoga or Malta, but Saratoga has a almost 24-hour economy. And you have to decide whether you want that, but certainly we don't have the ingredients for that with our existing approach to land use.
Yeah. And we looked at the economic report that was done not too long ago here. It's one of the things that, you know, you hear about across nationally, and then is what we refer to as structural unemployment, right? So these are employers that are coming in now that even the baseline job requires computer skills, high school degree, you know, that is the new blue collar job, and they're great jobs. The problem is that there's a gap, there can be a gap, so while there's people who need jobs, they may not have those skills necessarily that could fill those jobs. And so I think as you grow from your industries in this area, that's something you need to pay attention to. And the people who went to either finish high school or went to college or got a 2-year degree, they're in a position, especially if the economy stays as is, to making choices about where they live and what they want to do. And the way they're making those choices are about what's my quality of life, right? That's the millennial, right? And then even Gen Z is going to be even worse. What's my work-life balance? And so if we're not providing that work-life balance for them, then you're going to you potentially could suffer from that structural unemployment. The thing that may hinder your job growth might be the inability to capture new residents in this area, competing against, like I said, the rest of the nation and the region.
I'm curious why zoning moved away from the traditional way to begin with, that T1 to 6 with the special districts.
Chris is gonna hate that, it's like my favorite. The quickest summary I could do is, you heard the classic documentary that's Who Killed the Car, or Who Killed the Trolley, GE, you know. It's kind of long.
What's a trolley?
Yeah, right. The automobile, we became an auto-centric community. As the automobile became more prevalent, the cities were not desirable to live in. You know, think of Jacob Riis and those photos of how the other half lives. Cities just were not as desirable, and so as the automobile became a mode of technology, planners at that time and architects at that time really envisioned the cities of the Radiant City. They envisioned the cities of tomorrow that would be, think of that monolithic apartment building and a monolithic, you know, when you go down to Albany, the Empire Plaza, that was the dream. And then the Eisenhower interstate system, and so we subsidized that. We stopped giving mortgage-backed loans to urban areas because they were poor or mixed race. We subsidized sewers, we built the highway interstate system, and then we had grants like HUD, urban renewal, all those things, and it took 70 years and we created the dream, the American dream, the single-family detached house in the car, which was great. I mean, it was an amazing thing. GI Bill, gosh, I grew up on Long Island originally. I mean, it raised generations, but you know, ultimately the result of that is what we have today, and we're learning now that isn't, you know, as gas prices increases, as sedentary increases, as, you know, all the issues that I think we all are aware of that this report speaks to, you know, we're trying to reverse those issues.
That's why the trolleys were killed originally, the fossil fuel and tire rubber and automobile industries wanted them out.
Yeah, General Motors started buying up those things, and so there was some very Machiavellian things, but really it was a very large, it was just a mode of transportation and then public policy.
So we end up with a system that's designed for burning fossil fuels.
Yeah. And so we're trying to reverse that. So you go to school for this now, this is what you're being taught. The public policy paradigm, so NYSERDA, DOS, I mean, this is where, you know, what is the more sustainable approach to development. But I want to point out, you know, again, I don't want them to think that this is some like top-down international order that's causing this. This plan is very much, was a group learning exercise with a PAC and public input process. So you all have very much owned this decision-making. We've been helping you articulate it and draft it, but by no means it's not us coming off the UFO being like, maybe this is smart growth area, you know. Which would be awesome, because my job would be really easy, but no, I'm confident. I haven't worked on too many projects like this where people gave really good critical feedback, were always willing to change, but overall agreed on the principle.
I've heard a lot of talk about housing, even to the point of getting rid of the Champlain Center, theoretically,
Yeah.
and putting housing there. What about retail? Of course, brick and mortar is bye-bye,
Yeah, yeah.
aloha nui nui.
Yeah, so that wasn't all house, so that is very much mixed use. So the Champlain Center, just for your example, is that if you put an apartment building with 100 units in it, and you then say average 2 people per unit or 1.8 in an apartment, you know, and then say all those people need to eat and go get their hair cut and go to a bank, the retail often fills the 10 to 20%. That's what the development community is building. Their building model is build a mixed-use building, commercial ground floor, 80 to 90% apartments up above. When you repeat that, you have a much more integrated grassroots retail opportunity.
So what I'm saying is, when we're talking about commercial, we're talking private enterprise.
Mhm.
So this means you have to have somebody who wants to take the chance. Our family owns property on Church Street,
Mhm.
and brick and mortar is tough sell these days. Because everybody's doing their shopping
Yeah.
online.
Yeah, but you.
So,
Yep.
you know, you're gonna have all this commercial space, but unless somebody's willing to plunk their dough down and
Mhm.
take a chance for, I'm gonna sell ladies ready-to-wear.
Yep. So-
And then 3 years later,
Yep. So.
bye.
So the beauty is that the development community right now is willing to build apartment housing with commercial space that won't have a tenant in it 2, 5 more years, because they will get their return on investment with just the residential.
Yeah, but so where are these folks gonna shop?
I think they create.
So when you have the critical mass,
Online.
so when you have the critical mass of residential, that's when banks start financing businesses. So once you have, it's heads and beds, you need residents before, that was my point about the grocery store. You don't build a grocery, if I want a grocery store, you're not gonna get a grocery store. The answer is you need 1,000 more residents. So what you need is more housing, then you get a grocery store. Because it takes that entrepreneur to say, geez, I'm gonna open a coffee shop in the corner, there's 2,000 residents in this building right now. If I go to the bank, that bank's not gonna give a loan unless you have heads and beds.
I think Kohl's is a interest,
National.
right, but the one that we have here now though, a lot of people are like, oh, it's so small. It is much smaller compared to their other stores. But what is a unique hybrid though is they know that Amazon is the, 500-pound gorilla or whatever. However, they still know that having a brick and mortar footprint is unique to that, where people can come in, feel products, put the product on, test it out. You can now purchase something anywhere from Amazon, and you know where you can drop it off if it doesn't work for you? You bring it into Target.
Yeah.
So they're creating this new hybrid model where, yeah, it may be smaller, and I think you are gonna see some of these businesses become smaller, but I don't think you're gonna see a complete online culture. I think more and more will go there. I mean, you can buy cars, you can buy diapers, you can buy pretty much anything online, but there's still a very tactile version of some of that stuff. You may get to a place where you want to buy, you know, a cake mixer, and you go in and there's 5 different versions of it with different colors. You can see it, you can test it out, and then you go onto an iPad at the end of the thing and you order it there, and then they're going to ship it there, because the shipping still is the most expensive part of the online culture.
Yep.
So,
Don't get
And
me wrong,
yeah.
our properties do have tenants upstairs, we
Mhm.
have apartments and everything, this is very concept. But I know that brick and mortar is tough these days.
Oh, it's
Very, very, very
oh,
tough.
it really is, and that's why that's why the housing needs to lead. So right now,
Yeah.
your zoning is the opposite of that. So the only game you're playing right now is commercial. That's not doing anything for you. What you need is, you know, 2,000 more residents living in that area that can support the local business. I'll give you an example where we are. Our office is in Glens Falls. Now, we had the building form, right, with this historic downtown. Which are close enough, you've probably been to Glens Falls. Glens Falls, 5, 10, 15 years ago, it was empty. There was no residents, couldn't keep a business open, etc. Businesses would come in, a little shop, it'd close in a couple of years. Restaurants would go in, a little shop, close in. But fits and starts, the city made investments, whether it was in its streetscape, the Charles Wood Theater, these public spaces, amenities that people were willing to invest in, residential, there's subsidies, pilot agreements, all those sorts of things. Now it's gotten to the point what really has taken off because of the restaurants and retail that are taking off in Glens Falls is because our office is in a building that has, how many units are in your apartment, Chris?
60.
60 units. Bonaccio just built 150 across the street. Pete Hoffman, gosh, God knows how many units Pete Hoffman's finding. In the last 5 to 10 years, we finally put 1,000 heads down there that are now supporting, and that then some of the jobs followed suit, and then now you're seeing the restaurants and the small retails having staying power. They're not opening and closing.
I have another question, I noticed that, in all of these, I think in all of them, there are no utilities. Are we advocating varying utilities from now on?
I think when possible, that was something I personally, certainly in residential neighborhoods, we already do that in
Yes.
modern subdivisions. You know, we talked at length about this, the Route 3 corridor will be tough to tackle without a massive redesign.
And the reason I brought it up is because we had a question about utilities for the fair tire and trees, and I passed that where those trees are supposed to go, and there's utilities right above where those trees are supposed to go, and I'm thinking, you know, really?
You gotta pick the right
It's-
tree,
Yeah,
and so you can still do
Yeah,
that, there's
it's-
trees that only get, you know, 18 feet
Little
tall,
feet.
good street trees, but we had this discussion, and in various parts of town, and we actually did incorporate it, I think in more of the areas like T3, T4, maybe not the Route 3 corridor, but
Yeah, cause
we
that's
definitely, as we amend the zoning ordinance, we will have to be
very.
more specific and really think about where we can achieve that,
Mhm.
maybe with the least pain, certainly where you develop new, that's very ideal. But then the bigger projects like Route 3, full redesign, there's nothing that pains me more than looking down Route 3 at nice new buildings and hotels and seeing, you know, transformers in front of them.
Yep,
Oh, yeah.
But that'll be a massive DOT involved endeavor, but,
Yeah.
I know, you're looking, it's beautiful, right?
it is, that's what I'm saying.
I'm interested in hearing from our planning board members and Drew and Trevor. So with the design guideline implementations, the appeal factor is gonna grow for developers. Do you think, what's the profile of a developer that you think is gonna be looking?
We interact, I'll give you a specific profile of a developer that I think would be interested in this model, because we've already had it. I think Homesteads on Ampersand is exactly the type of developer that may be interested in this, somebody who has, a back catalog of project success that they've had in other places in the country, and even in our state, maybe New Jersey, someplace where they understand our vernacular, and been close enough to this type of development, but also will look at this area, once our zoning changes potentially, and see opportunity to capture a market that clearly exists. All you have to do is pick up our 2010 comprehensive plan, and look at the housing statistics to identify a major gap where jobs exist. And it would be, this is my guess, but we've seen it, so Larry Reagan was the developer of Homestead and Ampersand. He had a catalog of other properties that allowed him to finance that project. Was somebody savvy enough to use maybe HCR tax credits, wasn't afraid to partner with other agencies in our community, like in his case, BHSN or JCO, and had a high building standard themselves. Everyone can look at that site and go, well, geez, that one looks better than almost any other multifamily housing development area, robust landscaping, and to them, it was, well, of course we'll do this, this is how we do it everywhere, they make us do it like this everywhere. So, that's my sense of the folks who may be interested in that, and it may be folks from close, nearby. We see this in Taft's Corners in Vermont and Williston, a willingness to do mixed use where there's a high demand, and a willingness to put residential very close to commercial. But right now, our zoning completely precludes that for the most part. So I think it'll create opportunity. If you walked into my office right now and asked to do this really dynamic mixed-use development, I'd say, well, here's the list of 38 land use variances you need. And, you know, and all the exceptions you'd need to do it.
And how long do you think that by the time you get all the variances, went through the site plan review, planning board,
Bye-bye.
yeah.
And where
Aloha.
and what I would echo, that what I think is attractive about what seems like potentially people might look at these and go, well, these are pretty tedious and strict design guidelines. But the modern developer who might be willing to do this loves a good template, because he won't guess what this planning board member likes or this planning board member likes. It'll be clear what the regulation is without a lot of leeway for that specific part of town. And you know, I've worked with many developers who express, well, what do you think the planning board's gonna do? And I say, well, I don't know. You know, I can make a recommendation, and I think this is a best practice, but it's not an explicit part of our ordinance. So I think the more explicit you make some of these design guidelines, the developer can favor that.
And we find, I think, as a planning board, that there's an incremental shift. I mean, they're following your recommendations, we're often following your recommendations as well, and so facades, for example, change. You know, they're becoming more compatible with each other rather than being completely different. To develop character.
There
It's
have
already
been two projects kind of similar, like to this, that have come in the last year before the planning board, which we were predisposed to allow, right? One by the other. One of them hasn't gotten their financing yet, but, you know, it probably is a go, I would imagine. And then there's the housing authority out on the base, which was a kind of similar concept, which is going forward, so.
And what I like most about this image, Paul, is not this side of the road, it's the other side of the road. That clearly demonstrates this was an incremental step into a higher standard of, not, you know,
I do
not
like
putting
that
down the
side.
dead, but my point is, you might look at Route 3 and go, what will the first thing look like? But this was a practice in saying, we want to make this area the way we would like to create it. And
Well-
across the road, you have an unexpected situation, but in a beautiful neighborhood, but not by accident
Yes.
at all.
This-
They're the baby boomers.
If you remember this, if you've ever been down this way, this is exit 12, this roadway corridor, this was 4 lanes, there's no median planning sidewalks, so the roadway itself, this really summarizes everything.
I mean, honestly, I think, talking about the developer that's gonna be, realistically, the first 1 or 2 is probably gonna be done by a developer from outside of the area, because they've done it in a different area such as a Malta or a Saratoga. But once you get a developer like that comes in and does it, and all of a sudden it's successful, all of our local developers are gonna wanna jump on that, because they have the opportunity to make more money because they can do more things in this area. That's gonna kinda push ahead, but I think it's really, you know, most likely, I mean, Trevor, you probably think the same thing.
Yeah.
It might be someone from the outside that does it first, and then our local developers will jump on.
The other big part to it is we have a lot of outsiders there in this region looking at what we are doing.
Yes.
You know, it's not like we
Yeah, go
hope
find
hope somebody will knock at our door. With the landscape of international businesses and the activity, I mean, one of the things I found most fascinating is from exit 37 up through Consumer Square and teeing off with Smithville Boulevard is busier than Wolf Road down in Albany.
Yeah, right.
You know, we're seeing some really interesting activity up here. you know, and not to hinge it all on one particular business, but I'll use Schluter. I mean, they continue to grow and expand, and what I find fascinating about them is it's not just for the folks here locally. They bring people in here for trainings. They fly them in for a couple of days. That's one of the reasons that, you know, another hotel is looking to onboard in our community, is because they're coming here, they're spending 3 or 4 days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, getting training. Well, when they're here and they experience the community, then they become short-term ambassadors to say, this is what the community looks like, so on and so forth. So,
And we talked to the hotel, that's an example of the stakeholders we talked about in the corner, and they said it's tough, because people will come and wanna park the car, or however they got to your,
Yeah.
whether it was, you know, Uber or some others, and they, and then they, you know, hey, where can I walk? And it's, you know, they are hesitant to go out and walk, you know, Route 3 and get around, and, you know, and this is a point here, right, you know, because they're dealing with the same issue. I keep using Malta, and everyone's supposed to be like, well, that's Malta, it's Global Foundries. Well, let me tell you, Global Foundries, the amount of jobs you're generating is not too dissimilar. I mean, they haven't made Fab 2 and Fab 3, this big giant chip. They've got one, and you've got 14 other businesses that you've created. It's probably the same number of jobs. This is their terrible Route 9 segment, and they're going through the motions. They've got a grant, they did the design, they're working with DOT, and they're gonna try and do what they just did in that image you saw in Dunkin' Donuts, and what we're recommending you do to Route 3. They're gonna eventually road diet and beautify the corridor, and they you know, that project, I think it went out to bid, and it didn't, for Route 67, a portion, that one segment went out to bid, and they didn't get a bid. So, but they're within striking distance of redoing a segment of this. But they face the same issues. They want to underground the utilities, you know, because, you know, that, it looks ugly, but my point is, this is an area that had highway commercial, that had, you know, all sorts of awkward land uses, high, heavy roadway traffic right next to the North Bay, and I could take you on a tour of this thing, or you look at an aerial image, it's amazing the amount of growth that's going on. It's like 4,000 approved parking.
It's anecdotal, but, Michael, you're mentioning out-of-towners coming here. I was talking to a fellow who was a cabinet maker in Rouse's Point, who had just gotten a job at Schluter. And, you know, you can see the consolidation from the surrounding area coming in as also. As well.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been reflecting on this a lot personally. I mean, I've been in the region for 20 years now, since coming to SUNY Plattsburgh, you know, and my wife's from Long Island, and SUNY Plattsburgh brings a lot of downstairs upstate, and even if it's for a short period of time, there's lots of things that introduce people to this region for whatever reason. And as we continue to kind of carve out our little piece of the world, and we define what we want it to look like, there's some opportunity here that we're just tapping into. It's pretty exciting, actually.
I apologize, but I have to leave because the Beacon Town Planning Board won't have a quorum if I don't go sit on it. And, so I gotta run there 20 minutes, but anybody have any questions for me before I leave?
What happened to the town
Thank you,
road?
Trevor.
See you Tuesday.
All right, you're in excellent hands with, Chris and Paul, and I thank you guys again, and I thank our PAC members, I appreciate all your work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor.
Trevor,
Thank you.
take care.
Good night.
Anything else?
Yeah, what happened to Town Miller Road? Is there a sidewalk there?
We would love that. I mean, as the plan calls for, you know, complete streets on, so yeah, a road like Tom Miller Road,
So
certainly.
that's gonna just keep lurching. There's gonna be so much stuff there.
Oh, yeah, no, that's Tom Miller Road, that's the same vision. So our task as part of the scope plus the grant was to specifically look at Route 3 corridor. The idea, though, we have a number of road profiles in the planning document that we recommend all your roadways. Instead of moving to that suburban cul-de-sac feeder collector, we think it's local, you know, there's a hierarchy of urban design roadways, and Tom Miller Road should get the same treatment that any roadway should get, and that includes, you know, accessibility for all users and multi-modes of transportation. It's gonna vary. I don't wanna make you think, it's what they call context sensitive. You gotta, what is the land use, what is the overall density? You know, you don't have to build a Cadillac on every single roadway.
Is it intended to be simpatico with the climate smart communities guidelines?
Yeah, so the NYSERDA funding, I mean,
Yeah.
certainly speaks to, complements, et cetera, that effort. I mean, those numbers that we showed to you are based on the same evaluation you do for example, seeker, when you're looking at, all the climate change criteria, et cetera.
Yeah, we were the first community identified as a clean energy community, and and that's where some of the funding came from this.
Yes.
Because we know that not only do members of our community look for it, but a lot of the businesses are using that as as a overlay anyways. So it's better to look at some of the standards in the design and put it up front, rather than having them ask, well, what do we have to do?
Right.
That we can put it right up front.
I think a climate smart community is sort of the next step up from the clean energy.
It is, and my understanding is it's more geared towards cities than it is for towns. So that's why the clean energy community was one that the town went after initially. But there are many different opportunities. I mean, you get into, LEED standards and various, so there's other components that buildings and developers will go after because they're looking to meet some type of funding standard or tax credit or their own personal mission. They may feel as though they wanna put, green roofs, because, they wanna insulate it in a different way.
And we speak to that in some of the design guide
Yep.
criteria about trying to, you could formalize that. I mean, your zoning update, that process that has all the other public input, you could say this should include, X standards for green energy.
I like to promote lighter colored roofs, for example.
Yeah.
And
And so, this is gonna be a city, if it gets this kind of density. It's like a city, so we could go ahead with some of these other
Yeah.
requirements.
Well, I think back to the point is that, you do wanna think about this regionally. You wanna think about this townwide and regionally, right? Because if you just grow this area and say, wow, we're gonna double down on this growth here, and then say, let's really also keep growing outwardly, or we'll make new shopping center zoning districts around here, you sort of defeat the purpose. You need to be thinking about, hey, if this is where we're focusing growth, are there areas we may not wanna be focusing growth that we currently do allow, that may require, I think, I'm pretty sure when we did the 2009 comp plan, we did a build-out analysis, I'm not sure. But looking at, if not, those are the types of things you wanna be looking at and seeing, what's the horse trade that you're doing? Hey, if we're growing here, do we wanna grow as much here? And there are lots of different we don't get into this wasn't part of our scope, but there are lots of, different strategies like transfer development rights, where you can incentivize property owners outward in those undeveloped areas. They can sell their development rights into an area like this, and you may allow, if you're a developer buying those development rights from those people, you get a density bonus, for example. So you're creating a market to a free market of willing property owners and you're getting a benefit as a community of where you're not having sprawl continued outward from this area, and that this is the primary growth area. And you might consider some other areas can receive, Katyville, some other areas you wanna see little hamlet style growth, and revitalization, you might be able to include those as receiving areas. So there's a million and one strategies you can be looking at townwide and regionally.
I thought it was very interesting how much lower the service costs are to the town, to the municipality, as you begin to concentrate things in an area.
Yeah.
Anything else? On behalf of the town, we just wanna thank you. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and, we look forward to, adopting the formal,
Excellent. Well,
project.
thank you, and I know Trevor has a series of more detailed next steps about dates, resolutions, those sorts of things, and so we're still around to help with all those things as well, so.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
What lines are,
Well, I have
are you okay?
Yeah, I think we're gonna click through this pretty quickly, so.
What lines?
Sure, thank you.
Cass, Christine.
Laid out for you is some draft material for next week for consideration. Minutes, monthly reports, appointment for Saranac River Trail, surplus equipment, the wage and salary administration program, setting the grades, and then the budget amendment. So next week, keep in mind that Monday's a holiday, and Saturday is our budget workshop. So just wanna thank you in advance. I know we've done it the last couple of years. We keep saying that's a benefit, and that's why we're doing it. Thanks to our department heads. We'll bring them in, we'll start promptly at 8 o'clock. We'll go until completion. I think it's set until 4 or 5. We haven't usually gone that long. Yeah, so the goal is that Barb, I think, is gonna bring donuts again.
Yes.
You're in
I can't eat donuts though, so.
Well, I'll work that into it.
You can eat eggs.
I can eat eggs. Are you bringing the eggs?
I could.
Okay.
You want eggs? What kind of eggs you want?
You surprised me. I let, you know what my grandmother makes me is dropped eggs. I am a sucker for dropped eggs.
Dropped eggs?
Yeah, or
You mean like
poached eggs. Yeah.
What's not probably transport very well.
So you don't- you
Okay,
don't-
Well, she
yes.
asked, I mean, you never
You
know.
like poached eggs? We could do 3-minute eggs.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Too
All right.
strong a roll.
Um,
to deal with.
are you doing a town meeting on the fifth
So that's why I wanted to.
Thursday of this month?
Yeah.
It is very unlikely.
Very good, I mean,
Are you asking because of the Republicans?
The guessing you can.
Cares about that?
Okay.
No,
Well,
I
the
asked, no, I did, yeah, Clark wanted a meeting.
Yes.
And Deb said she was gonna hold that in case you
We
needed it.
typically hold it just in case
Okay.
something does
Not a
develop.
problem.
If you really need it, let me know, and then we'll,
I don't really care.
just let me know. So,
Could care less.
7:15 is when we're gonna
Will
hit.
be.
All right?
Yep.
Thank you very much, and no need for an exec session.
Uh,
I know, right?
And I'm not
Sickness has arrived.
sure aligning